going on, fellow growers? This is Andrew from Tail Wagon Farms. Just got in a little while ago from harvesting a couple little tomatoes. Nothing too crazy, but wanted to show you how I'm going to put up some crushed tomatoes into some pint jars. Already canned a whole bunch of tomatoes this year, and the crushed tomatoes are kind of my favorite at the moment. So thanks for coming along, and I'll show you how it's done. So, first things first. With canning, always use approved canning recipes. This is my favorite book, The Complete Book of Home Preserving by Ball. You can also go to your agricultural extension, and they have recipes on there that are approved and safe for canning. You don't want to can stuff without something that's been approved because it might get you sick. Botulism's not a good thing to get. So, also, I'm not a food scientist. This is how I do things. I follow recipes as close as I can to the books. So, take my advice with a grain of salt and do this at your own risk. So, enjoy. Let's talk tools. In here, I have my Ball canning pot with some pint jars heating up. They were sterilized before they went in there. Next up, we have canning funnel, jar lifters, headspace calculator, knife cutting board, my book, of course, nice big pot. Over here we have our Kitchenaid mixer with the food grinder attachment with the food mill attachment as well. This just makes life a lot easier when it comes to processing tomatoes. And over here we have our lids and rings. Ball does not recommend that you heat them up anymore, so I just keep them off to the side after everything gets sanitized. The jars were sanitized and the rings were sanitized in the dishwasher. So not the lids, because you don't want to melt the wax seal on it. Real quick, just want to talk cleanliness. It's really important with canning that as many things as possible are as clean as they can be. Usually I like to sterilize my jars in the dishwasher. That way I know they're good and clean, even when they're fresh out of the box. I sterilize my rings and all of my tools. The funnels, jar lifters, any spoons I'm going to be using. A lot of times I'll just put them directly into the canning pot. And then also while we're heating the water, as long as it's at a simmer, that'll keep the jars nice and clean. Surfaces, you want to wipe them down real good and make sure you have clean hands. So that's just trying not to introduce any bacteria, funguses into our canned goods, which could cause spoilage later on. Also, down the road, when you're opening these up, always, once you pop the lid, take a look inside. Make sure you don't see any mold, anything like that. No funky smells, no funky tastes. If you get any of that, toss it out. Try another jar. So, my first step that I like to do is wash your tomatoes, let them all dry. Then I take the smaller tomatoes that I won't need to cut up, and I run them through the food mill first. This way, it's just I can start getting an accurate count of how many tomatoes I'm going to have. So I like to have the seeds and skins come out over here into this bowl, and then I use a 4 cup measuring cup to catch the pulp from the food mill attachment. This way I can calculate how many jars I'm going to need. So for today I'm just doing crushed tomatoes, so a pint jar is 2 cups, approximately 2 cups. It's a little less with the headspace, but so if I get 4 cups here, I can get 2 jars, and then I'm going to have to add a little bit of lemon juice for the acidity, but then I can figure out exactly how many jars I need. If you're making sauce, you usually cut that in half, so 4 cups of crushed tomatoes will make approximately 2 cups of sauce. So using this, it's all hooked up. I like to use this on speed about 5, and it will be pretty noisy, but also don't push too hard because you will shoot tomato seeds up on the cabinet and your better half will get mad at you. Got my first 4 cups of pulp here. But I like to use these little deli containers to hold my measuring cup a little bit closer so I don't get as much splash. And also when I pull this away, then the drips have somewhere to go. But so far I got 4 cups, so that's going to go in the pot. And I got a few more tomatoes to send through, and then I'm going to send the pulp through again. So what I have here in the bowl is the skins and the seeds. I'd advise against putting this in your compost. It did that once, and the next year I spread my compost on a raised bed, and I had about 1,000 tomato seedlings come up. I am going to run this through again with the new design of the food grinder and food mill attachment. The fruit and vegetable strainer is what they call it. You do have to run the KitchenAid higher than the book recommends. So I usually have to put it up to about 8 to keep it moving. If not, it all kind of binds up in there. The old model didn't do that, but the newer one did. Still works all right though. Also, a really good use for these once they're completely dried out, you can see they still have a little bit of moisture to them, is I like to throw it in the dehydrator, dry it out until everything's nice and crispy, and then we grind it up into tomato powder and use that kind of like a tomato paste. You add it to your soups, a couple tablespoons really thickens stuff up and gives a really nice tomato flavor. Once we ran the tomato skins through another couple times, this is all that's left. It's pretty much bone dry, just seeds and skins. So this really isn't that much, so I'm just gonna kind of throw this up the hill in the bushes somewhere, and maybe I'll get some tomatoes next year out of it. Now what I like to do, I am just shy of the 4 cups that I was hoping for, so I'm gonna take a spoon, kind of push this pulp down, and see what we have at the bottom there. Hopefully get all that in there. Well, looks like I'm just shy of 4 cups again, so that should work out perfect. Once I add the lemon juice and cook it for a couple minutes, it'll fill 4 pint jars pretty much right perfect, with the right and perfect amounts. Now that I got my 2 quarts of tomatoes in the pot, I'm going to just start bringing them up to a boil fairly gently, like a medium heat. Don't want it to scorch the bottom, so just stir it occasionally. And once it boils, we're going to let it boil for 5 minutes before we pack the jars. While this is beginning to boil, I'm going to start cleaning up the food mill and grinder from the KitchenAid. Because as always with canning, we want to try to keep the area as clean as possible. And then I'll get my jars ready to go. I just want to talk about a couple of the items that we'll be using here today to can. First is the jar lifters. These are used to lift the jars out of the boiling water. They work a heck of a lot better than tongs, and they keep you from burning yourself. Next up will be the headspace measurer. It's got little indents here, 1/4 inch increments to check how much headspace you have. That's the distance between the top of the food and the top of the jar. It's very important with canning because it gives the food room to expand but not try to push the lid off when it's getting heated up in the pot, and it is really essential for it to get a good seal. Next up, so jar funnel. Fits very nicely inside the jar. It's got a big opening, so you can fit a lot of stuff through there. Even bigger things like when you're doing sliced peaches, stuff like that. Just makes it a lot easier to get into the jar, and it makes it so that the rim will stay a lot cleaner, which is the next tool. A little bit of a paper towel. I usually dip it in my canning pot water to get it wet in order to clean the rim. Then I run my finger over to make sure it's clean to ensure that I get a good seal. So now I want to talk about the two-piece canning lid system. So these are the Sure-Tight lids from Ball. I've tried other brands and wasn't a huge fan. Use new lids every single time. Do not reuse these. They're only made to be used once. If you want to reuse the lids on something that you're not going to be sealing, like if you're just storing stuff in mason jars that's like dry goods, like rice, stuff like that, you can do that. But make sure that you know that they've been used already. We usually open ours with a little Barkey bottle opener, so they usually get a nice little dent in them. That's how we know that they've been used. The other piece is the ring. This slides on over the top, and we're going to go fingertip tight. No tighter than that. You're not going to crank down, but you want to be able to have it so that so the air can escape from the jar as it heats. You'll see that when we put it in the pot. You'll see all the bubbles starting to come up, and that's air getting pushed out. Our pot is now starting to boil, so I'm going to set my timer for 5 minutes, like the recipe asked for. And while that's doing that, we need to add some lemon juice and salt to the jars to get the acidity right. These jars have been heating up inside the canner pot because we don't want to add super hot liquid into a cold jar. That causes, you have the risk of an jar cracking and exploding on you. So according to the recipe from Ball, what we need is 1 tablespoon of lemon juice per pint, and then we'll need a half a teaspoon of salt per pint if we'd like to. I like to add the salt for taste. I think it really brings out the flavor. You could also use citric acid instead of the lemon juice. It's be a 1/4 teaspoon per pint, but we actually really like the flavor of the lemon juice in there. It just adds a little extra something to our crushed tomatoes. So you want to measure these out beforehand. It's also very important that you use bottled lemon juice for this. You don't want to use fresh lemon juice because the acidity could be different in any lemons. This is all the same, so it works really well to make sure that your tomatoes have enough acidity to be safely water bath canned. Next up, we need to add our salt, half a teaspoon. I use just normal kosher salt. One tool I forgot to mention that's one of the most important, chopsticks. These work really good for everything around the house gardening wise. If you order Chinese food, always ask for extra chopsticks. We never actually do because I cook it myself. So we order them off of Amazon and we get big packs of them once a year. They work really good for plant steaks, but when it comes to canning, they work really well for stirring in the jars and making sure you got no bubbles around the edges. Timer just went off, so time to get some tomatoes in these jars. Put our jar funnel on, give our tomatoes a little stir, and we're going to want a 1/2 inch of headspace. So be careful touching these jars because they are going to be extremely hot. Move our jar funnel. Use our gauge to check. This one needs just a touch more. I usually measure this now. Just use little tablespoon or a teaspoon. Perfect. Right up to a 1/2 inch of headspace. Now that we got our jars filled, just give them all a little stir. Don't want to get too aggressive with them, stirring. Mix that salt and that lemon juice around. Our next step is going to be to take paper towel and wipe the rim. So you can see some stuff starting to come off of it. A lot of times I'll take one paper towel real quick, do the rim with the dry one, get the majority of the big stuff off. Then I'm going to go dip the paper towel in my canning pot water. Let it get some moisture on there. And go over the rims one more time. Give it a feel real quick. I don't feel anything on there. That looks good. I usually like to go around until I don't see any tomatoes coming off or any of what I'm trying to can come off onto this. That one looks good. 2. This step is super important because you don't want anything obstructing the ring of the lid touching on the jars. So now, just take these, center them on the jars. We're going to take our rings, get them started, and just fingertip tight, just till you start feeling some resistance. So it touches the lid just a little bit. So spin it on, touch the lid. I usually like to go maybe 1/8 of a turn at the most. Alright, these are ready to go in the canning pot. So you'll notice there's empty jars in there. I like to use empty jars as a spacer just to keep the jars from falling over in this big pot. Watch as it comes in, you'll see the bubbles start coming out. That's good, that's what we want. You don't want it on too tight or else those bubbles won't be able to release. We're going to want to make sure our jars are covered by at least 1 inch of water. So right now they're at about 1/2 inch. This should work out. That's looking really good. Then with this ball Freshtech canning pot, you put that on top. That just helps with water circulation. Throw the lid on, and now we wait for it to boil. It's getting closer. Still not there though. Another couple minutes. There we go. That looks pretty good. Start my timer for 35 minutes. Alright, so the jars are coming up on 35 minutes right now. You need to adjust your time depending on the altitude that you're at. Higher altitude, you need a little more time. Here, we're about 600 feet above sea level, so 35 minutes, there goes our timer, is perfect. Now, we don't just pull the jars out of the pot. We turn off the heat, remove the lid, and we're going to let it sit for 5 minutes. Alright, as we're coming up to our 5 minutes with the pot off, we want to have a landing area set up here. We don't want to be pulling the hot jars out and putting them on a cold surface. So once the timer goes off, I'm going to remove this inner lid that is on top of the jars and move them out here. If we listen carefully, we might hear a ping as the jar is showing that it's sealed. Grab with your jar lifters. Look at that. Beautiful tomatoes. Well, it doesn't seem like we're going to hear any pings. It looks like all the lids are forced down. Uh, there's like a little bubble in the middle of the lids that you'll see. If that is moving at all, just means the jar's not sealed. But don't mess with them for 12 to 24 hours. If any of them aren't sealed after that, you'll be able to tell because you'll be able to push down on the top and it'll make a noise. There'll be some flex there. Just throw that in the fridge and use that in the next week or so. If not, these will store these lids. They say they're good for 18 months. So thank you for coming out today to Tail Wagging Farms. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know with some comments what you guys want to see, what else you want to see me preserve, or any other method you want to see preserving. Remember, cleanliness is super important with canning, and don't reuse lids, and of course, make sure you follow approved recipes. So, hope you have a good day, and happy growing.